And we are live, I'm delighted to say, with my guest this week, Dawna Jones. Dawna, the speaker, she's an author of multiple books, as well as contributor to others. She is somebody who helps people with complex issues by helping them to shift their perspective. She's a blogger for the Huffington Post. Dawna, welcome to the show.
I'm really delighted to be here. Thanks, Richard.
And
Thank you.
It's a delight. And given our current context, we chose before the show that perhaps we should start with your ebook, Making Sense of Life's Interruptions. How apposite. So let's start with that. What was the central idea in that book, Making Sense of Life's Interruptions?
It was, thank you. You know, that sort of came about because I had great plans. I was trying to follow all the society's rules where you work really hard and you do certain things and poof, success results, the formula that they teach you in just about so many different places. Society teaches you. It's part of societal conditioning. And in 2008, that is not what happened. So, I mean, I'm not the only one, but there were many who just crashed epically. And I spent the next 9 years nomadic without a home and everything else and sort of the thing, no matter what you tried, it didn't go. So you're really in a place where you have to both make sense of what's going on. You have to say, who am I in this new context I'm in? Never been here before. There's no instruction manual. And what do I do with this? And so you're in a place of making, I think, more conscious and intentional choices. And the first step is, to answer that question, what the heck just happened? And what beliefs do I have or was I carrying around that just don't apply? Let's put it simply. So, I mean, it's relevant because here we are today in another one of those interruptions, only it's a global one. And it's a very, from my point of view, yes, it presents all sorts of difficulties and all of the emotions that go with that. But there's also opportunity to reinvent, redesign, and rethink. So I think that when I wrote it, I was thinking, okay, you just throw everything up in the air, re-examine everything, and you get to ask a whole lot of questions, and then you get to decide where you want to go from there. So,
right. Well, perhaps we should talk through a little bit what you've just talked about. So you've in 2008 you ended up nomadic. Does that mean you lost your home? What happened?
Everything. Yeah, lost everything, including all the over time I lost all the investments as well. Yeah, I lost everything, and so it tears you down to. I think really the core to it is that we always define ourselves, our security, our personal security, based on what's going on around us. Do I have a home? Do I have this? Do I have all these things? And when those things aren't there, it takes you back to yourself, and you say, well, who am I really? And what if I base my security in me? So those are the kinds of questions that arise. I mean, they sound existential, and they probably are, but it's quite a practical set of questions, because the option of, when you're in that place, you can either get depressed and go down that rather slippery and not so pleasant slope, or you can just kind of rethink it and see it, work with it in a different way and say, all right, I'm going to use this to get better at bouncing forward, to get more resilient. I'm going to get better at a whole lot of things, but in order to do so, I have to get rid of some fixed ideas about how the world works. So it's really just that big shift. I mean, it sounds cleaner in talking about it now than it was in experience.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you start to go down that slope before you came to this realization?
Well,
or how did that work?
Yeah, definitely. You go down that slope. You start slipping down, but fortunately, I've had more than one depression, and when you hit them, you go, okay, I know what this looks like. Wait a minute. It's like a spiral down of your basic. I'm going to speak frankly. It's your heart energy. As soon as your spirit starts dipping down, your sense of control starts to dive. Your feeling that can do anything, your sense of value, all those things. Once those start to dive down, it's a fast slope. And I trained myself to catch that, and to kind of go, okay, here we go. No, we're not going to go there. And then I started, using that sensation to make far more intentional decisions, introduce some things that allowed me to move forward, gratitude being a core one, a simple one, but also, just continuing the creative process. So I sort of gathered up, I wrote, Decision Making for Dummies in 2014. But prior to that, I downloaded just a whole lot of information. I called it Diary to Destiny, never did anything with it. Making Sense of Life's Interruptions, which is like life can be interrupted by anything. What can we learn from it? And also at the same time, you could see what was coming. I mean, I could see that we were on a crash course with the ecological, biodiversity, planetary health. That was evident in 04, 02, and even earlier than that, it was evident. I mean, I have here Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, 1962, the first clarion call for that. So we've been able to see this coming for a long time, and there's just been this lethargy, this, complacency, if you will, and a lot of deeply entrenched patterns, systemic patterns. So this is the place where we get to throw those up and work with it in a similar way.
Mm. So I'm interested, particularly for anybody who resonates with what you've just said and who are starting themselves to feel like they may be going on one of those cycles downwards. What you talked about training yourself to spot it. So what do you mean by that? How are you able to identify that you're on this track, and how are you able to pull yourself out of it or pause yourself?
Well, a couple things. First of all, it has to do with feeling. It really has to do with being aware. It's a sensing thing, in the Kinefin model. It was nice of David to do that, because there's this.
Well, I'm just aware that people may not know the Kinefin model of David, so you could maybe unpack that first.
He's got this lovely quadrant, but core to all four quadrants, and whether you're dealing with a different context, is the word sensing, which everyone is capable of doing. So sensing is just, how am I feeling, at a heart level. So not how should I feel, or, none of the head stuff, but just straightforward, how am I feeling? And then the next layer to that is, what am I focusing on? What am I paying attention to? And so if you're paying attention to the negative, if you're paying attention to, if you're angry over how you got there, if you're blaming somebody, if you're feeling victimized, those are all, jumping off points for turning things around to a better place to be, because it's all in us at any point in time to turn things around.
So you mean if once you've identified, I'm blaming somebody, or I'm making myself a victim, once you've identified, that gives you power, presumably, to stop pursuing that.
You bet.
That track, that thought process.
Absolutely.
And what am I feeling? So it's okay. And this is where this is where personally I found it very powerful to accept all the feelings, right? If I'm angry, if I'm sad, it's all good. It's not about having like positive emotions, right? It's about sensing what those emotions are.
Exactly. I mean, when you're in that stage of sort of being, okay, what's going on right now? And you're just making sense out of it. It starts with how you're feeling. I mean, like it or not, we use our emotions to navigate. And so you can say, oh no, I make rational decisions. Well, biologically and biochemically, you do not. They are completely entangled. And so to be aware of your emotions allows you to work with them more effectively. And if you're not aware of them, then they run you.
Right.
So, yeah.
And then just talk us a little bit. So you started to sense that you were going down this spiral. You did this sensing work. You were able. What were you then able to do once you'd got a grasp and you got a sense of where you were at?
You start reframing everything, and you just look for the openings where you can I'll give you the story I often tell is the story of watching the documentary with Ewan McGregor and Charlie Borman, cycling from England down to South Africa. And I've been in Africa, and I've been in some of the back areas there, and they went into a village. They were invited in for dinner, and they knew when they were having their dinner that they were eating someone else's meal for the week. That these people just had virtually nothing, but they were so excited to have these two guys come through that they invited them for dinner. And I sort of thought, oh man, that's the thing. I just have to see this differently. Here's people that have really nothing, and yet they're so gracious to offer food that they know what that means for them, but they're still great. And I just need to shift my angle on this. And so there, it always comes in these small, little steps, these small little tweaks of awareness, but as these tweaks build, you start getting a wider set of skills to kind of build up over time. So, first is as you said, first is, observing and feeling and accepting. And then from there, you're going, okay, well, now that I can see it and I'm not fighting with it because I've accepted that I'm in this place, then what next? And so, being grateful for what you do have, what you can control, and then of course, the next tier would be completely reframing it and seeing it differently and then moving forward.
Right. And this reframing, so what were the concrete manifestations of this reframing then? What started to shift that allowed you to get out of that cycle?
Well, I mean, one of the things that I'm well aware of is that biologically is that it's a little phrase that I use, but it's repression of your expression creates depression or aggression. In other words, basically energetically, your energy is either going to go in or it's going to go out in a big blast if you're not aware of this. So I just started writing. I realized I've just got to write, and it didn't matter whether anybody read it or not. I just had to express and express and express. So whether it's photography or, I mean, that's not my thing, but if it's, whether it's photography or writing, or it was just getting the ideas out and feeling like I was accomplishing something, which was really part of just kind of repositioning how I was working with these moments. So that's how it started.
And I guess you didn't need much in the way of financial resources to do that.
No, you don't. I mean, you just need a computer, and mine broke a couple of times, but it was still, family helped out, different places kind of showed up. So it all worked out in the end. And even if if you don't have a computer, you can still I can't use it very well because my brain works faster than my hand, but you can still use journals and stuff like that. So it's really just ensuring that you're just kind of continuing to not bottle it up, but to let things go. And then, you've got some objectivity to take a look at and go, okay, so that's what was going on. Because once you back up, like anything, once you get some distance and some objectivity to it, you can make more sense out of it.
Right. Okay.
And I mean, I'm sure you've been through that. Like you've probably had patterns going on in your life and you go, wait a minute. Can we talk about that?
Yeah. So, yeah. So, well, I mean, I've shared about this before, but the major, I suppose, pattern interruption for me to begin with was with heavy drinking, and I spent a lot of time working in London in a management consultancy, and I suppose that the big pattern, for me, was to stop drinking. Now, that didn't happen sort of overnight. That was over a series of very confronting conversations with individuals in my life about my drinking. Not anybody within my corporate realm. I mean, that behavior was very much enabled in the environment I was in. But it was those hard conversations with some people to whom I'm very grateful to this day, who pointed out, I suppose they did some sensing for me in a sense, right? They were an external sensor of my behavior, and they were somehow able to, and I must have been ready at the time to receive the message that Richard, your drinking isn't normal. It's you're not putting vodka on your cornflakes in the morning, but that doesn't mean you haven't got a problem with drinking. And I needed to hear that message several times, but eventually something in me cracked, and I realized, well, I know what cracked. I woke up at one point at sort of 2:00 in the afternoon, having been drinking all night, and had that realization. Okay, I'm not going to achieve all the things I want to achieve in life with this pattern of behavior, with this lifestyle. And that was the first step to quit drinking. But then, of course, once I quit drinking, which in some senses was the easy bit, then I started, well, chose to look really, but somehow was forced to look at why it was I drank so heavily in the first place. And that took me back to my childhood and ultimately my birth, which I know might sound a bit far out for some people, but that was that was then, and that was, what was that, 12 years ago, over 12 years ago, that that journey started. unpacking all of the origins of those patterns, layer upon layer, and going back and reliving a lot of the more traumatic aspects of my early life, healing, resolving, a lot of tears, but yeah, and to some extent still working on that. I mean, at a lesser intensity now, much reduced intensity, but yes, that's, and then so slowly the patterns started to shift as I dealt with the underlying drivers for them. Yeah, so that's my mode of working. But interestingly enough, it did well. So first, the major pattern interruption to simply stop the intake of the toxin. That was the first one, but then over time, what had me develop more sort of sustainable ways of dealing with the dysfunction was to begin with that question: what am I feeling? So important. What am I feeling? And to begin with, I didn't really have, I mean, I knew the word sad or angry, or, you know, I understood intellectually what those words meant, but it took me a long time to be able to really feel what it meant in my body, to feel angry, to feel sad, to feel frustrated, you know, to really start to get it biologically, what those feelings meant for me, and then using that as an access to inquiring as to when I first felt those feelings. Where did I first feel those? Where is this coming from ultimately? Because, well, the phrase, if it's hysterical, it's historical, right? If I've got this big reaction to something which seems completely out of place and disproportionate to the current scenario, there must be something in my past that's driving it. And so that was the cycle of unpicking over time, was to work out what were the early experiences that were driving these oversized reactions in the present, which I had been self-medicating for.
And you're not alone. I mean, the liquor sales in the province I'm in in Canada have gone up 40%. So since the whole self-isolation thing began, so it is a go-to distraction for many people. And the beauty of it is that you recognize what your patterns were, and then you work with them. So they do shift over time. Is there a particular skill that you found that worked particularly, like that sort of showed up eventually, that you kind of go, oh, that's there it is?
The journaling. So the skill, two principal skills, I suppose, is the journaling. So that ability to write down my feelings. So this happened today. What did I feel? And then the reliving. So that's the first thing. That's the access point. You know, once I've really experienced, embodied some reaction to an event, usually through a set of feelings, but sometimes through sort of physical sensations as well. And then the second skill is to go back and relive it. Is this familiar? Is this feeling familiar? When did I first feel it? And then put myself back in that situation. You know, what would I have done in that situation had I been able to feel what was going on for myself? Had I been able to express myself? You talked about expression versus suppression. You know, had I not suppressed in that moment back then, what would I have said? What would I have done with my body? What would I have felt? And that's the reliving that I've found to be so important, because that ultimately gets me to the tears, and to the healing, and to the grief. And then as I grieve, it's literally dissolved from the system, dissolved from my organism, and gone forever. That's the curative aspect of it, you know, for me.
Brilliant. And it's, I mean, in terms of what's going on organizationally now, really timely, because in my years of, 20 some odd years of facilitating at all different levels in organizations across sectors, it's not hard to see the patterns that that companies live. And of course, a lot of those systemic patterns are showing up today. So we're seeing the one that's addicted to command and control, addicted to authority, as assuming authority or leadership is authority based, as opposed to intrinsically sourced. and so that's one. And the other one is addiction to perfection, which basically says you can't learn, which means you are in big trouble as an organization if you cannot learn, if you're busy trying to make everything perfect and assuming that everything has to be absolutely, then you're just completely handicapped from an innovation standpoint. So, I mean, in the same way that everybody has personal patterns, organizations have their own patterns, and there's nothing like an interruption to throw those up in the air. And just watching the different responses to remote working, watching how that works, watching even how governments respond, the difference between how Denmark responded, what they've been doing in terms of working out a deal so people didn't get laid off, in a cooperative arrangement, versus different other nations that just sort of says, hey, you're on your own. And so it's a pretty random assortment of decisions based on, where the leaders were at or where the decision makers were at the time. So yeah, I think that's the beauty of the interruptions, is it is, it sort of cuts across human, personal, and then organizational, and then at the much larger level, societal. So very powerful time, and we're in exciting times for redefining and reinventing how we work with these things.
Yeah, and that's interesting. That's an interesting framing of it, because I think many organizations right now will be framing this as the question will be, how do we survive?
Yeah.
And another, and that may be valid, right? It's not to say that's not valid. I mean, but also, like, what is this showing up about me? What is this showing up about our organization? What's being revealed in this interruption? Really powerful question, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, on that note, one of the assumptions that humanity has made since time began, although the early period of time, they were much more sustainable, like the wild people, all the original people. But as you move forward, what people assume is that survival is based on doing so at any cost. So it's a consumptive approach. We're gonna take this, we're gonna eat it, we're gonna eat all the animals that we can. We're gonna, it's a harvesting exploitation mentality. And so when you have an interruption like this, that's harsh and sharp and really puts it in our faces, and organizationally, any kind of interruption, doesn't matter what it is, the chance there is there to say, let's use our creativity to come up with a better approach. And so, you can survive by getting desperate and sucking down resources, sucking down the human spirit, sucking down biodiversity, whatever it is you feel you need to draw on. Or you can just say, hey, we've got a new platform for what we do with this and how we could, create something better. So great time for shifting our angle on, survival. We don't survive by exploiting what little is left. We survive by co-creating together something that's new. And that's where I see these cooperative efforts showing up in different corners of the planet. And you just go, oh, yes. Yeah, I understand that we have a different set of opportunities here. So
what are some of the examples of cooperative efforts that are inspiring you right now?
Well, the one I just saw the other day was Denmark, the government of Denmark sitting down with employers and labor unions and everybody and just working out a deal whereby, they as long as the companies promise not to lay anybody off, then they would be able to guarantee 70 to 80% of the workers' salaries.
Right.
Now that's intelligent. That's an intelligent approach. So, I mean, so that to me is tremendous cooperation. We're seeing more than ever, I think, Zoom, the conference platform Zoom that we're on right now, has now turned into a place where families get together on Zoom. And that didn't happen before. So, there's just people coming together in a way in which they wouldn't have done so otherwise. So it's all of a sudden the connection is starting to get reestablished, and which, by the way, is one of the other disconnection is one of the sources of depression and so forth. So great opportunity to reconnect with people on a really human level, not on a practical or likes, or not on a superficial level, like how many likes you have or all that kind of stuff, but on a really practical, heartfelt level to connect with people, which is one of the reasons why your podcast is wonderful, by the way, because it does have these heart-to-heart conversations that you don't often see. You usually see these mental mental things that go on that just deal with that domain and not deal with the whole person. So we are, I think going forward, we're dealing with the whole person.
Yeah, that's right.
Bringing us all online.
Yes, that's true. Well, yeah, there's this need to connect to our families, to people they're more confined to the home. I mean, I'm finding with my children now, I'm spending more time with my children. I'm having to take on a lot more of the childcare. This is the way I speak, but I'm taking on a lot more of the childcare, and I'm spent a lot more time with my children, and then talking about feelings, starting to feel some guilt. Actually, I'm starting to feel some guilt. Like, well, should I be spending more time with them? Under normal circumstances, like is it? So it's So I think this process of checking in with how we're feeling as we move forward is such an important one. And you talk about this. And I find that at an individual level, and you talk about it in your decision making book, as I understand it, in terms of this need to be checking in emotionally and sense making within organizations. So on a broader level, is that something you think is important now?
Well, absolutely. I mean, it always has been important. Unfortunately, companies just haven't been doing it. So you can go in and see companies completely addicted to action. So as long as they're doing solution, problem solving, as long as they're addicted to that, they wouldn't have seen anything coming. They would not see shifts coming because they're so, in a tunnel down, they completely lack foresight under those conditions. So this is where the objectivity, stepping back and just saying, okay, we've got all this stuff going on, but we have to get some, higher level thinking, if we're really just some distance and just take a look at things. So that's a reflective process. It's not something you can't really reflect and do at the same time. It's kind of like running a 50-meter dash and saying, I want to ponder the direction I'm heading in, when you're really just heading around in a circle. So, you have to step back and just say, what new directions should we be looking at? What's coming down the pipe? That's a very intuitive, you can't, in this complex world with the unpredictability, the volatility, you cannot use extrapolation, which we used to use in strategic work. But now it's more a matter of saying intuitively, what's going on? Where do I see things coming? And it's not intuitive in terms of personal. You have to put a collective together. So, now we've got the term collective intelligence for that, but it's really just using everyone's view of what's coming down to do that work. And that's where getting back, getting some distance, having the reflection, sensing, the emotions of an organization will tell you whether they're going to be resilient or not. The degree of trust that's involved, the spirit in the workplace, how are people looking after each other? Is there a sense of belonging? Is there a strong sense of care? Do people support one another when the times are rough, or do they get, lopped off because they're not performing? So, these are the measures, I think, that really show what the health of an organization is. And it's fundamentally just a step up, or a scaling, if you will, of what's involved for us personally as human beings.
Yeah. And as you speak, what comes to me is that when I think, because I understand this idea of collective intelligence and how it's this really powerful asset that organizations are underusing. But when we think about the origins of that term and the research, it's all been around intellectual problem solving, right? And they've studied the ability of groups to solve intellectual problems, and they found that when we increase turn taking and reduce hierarchy, that these groups are able to enhance their collective intelligence and perform better at these cognitive tasks. But you've almost expanded the sense of that, because really, to my mind, you're talking about the collective intuition, collective emotional state, collective sense. So it's about much more than collective intelligence. Is that right?
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. And I like the word you just used, collective intuition, because that really is what it amounts to. Yeah, very much so.
What's the sense of this organization, this organism? And before we talked to, before we came on air, we discussed whether or not to get into this idea that you wrote about in one of your HuffPost articles, actually, that the organization is part of life itself.
Ah,
Yeah.
yes.
How does, well, tell us what you mean by that.
Well, I mean, first of all, where we had a breach between the life support systems that support us and humanity goes way, way back. And it was one of those things where we just said, oh, these are two separate worlds. Man dominates. Well, we've done quite a bit of domination. And in the course of that, we've drawn down on the life support systems that we use, the air, water, soil quality, quite heavily. We've also done that through a linear decision-making process because we haven't considered impact. We haven't considered relationships. Organizations are known as living systems quite simply because it's an interaction of relationships. And it's not about the capital assets, the things that, if you take people away, will those things run by themselves? No. And the resiliency of a company is based on the power of the human spirit. It's based on the power of those people collectively to come up with different approaches to put them into play. And it's not run on mental energy. That's exhausting. If people go home at the end of the day and they're exhausted, it's because they're running off of mental energy and they need something more nourishing. So a living system recognizes that, companies are must respect nature because that is where they're getting their raw supplies from. They don't count it. It's been called externalities for eons because it can't be counted. So, it was a convenient way of dealing with it. Let's just ignore it. But you can't do that now. We've got our face against the wall. The whole climate change issue puts our faces right smack up against, how is it time now for us to be responsible for our actions? Is it time now for us to take care of every bit of life on this planet? And so there's two layers I'm describing here. One is the living system inside an organization, and the other one is the interaction with the outside world, with society, with the environment, with the planet itself. So we have, it is a much wider set of interactions. And when we understand that, and there are companies that do understand this, and public companies, they're big, and they're running what I call biomimicry management, but they're running off of the principles that complex systems use in order to, be in order to be resilient. I'm going to use the word sustainable because it's not about that; it's about vitality. Do we have vitality in our organizations? Do we have, the vitality in our natural systems? And we don't right now because we've depleted them, but we have the chance to fix that. We have the chance to regenerate and rejuvenate those systems. That's exactly the crossroads we're in right now. This is the gap that we can create from. So that's living systems. It's a much wider set of interactions.
Yeah. And it makes sense to me that the way that you're talking about, we take care. So we take care of the human beings inside our organization. But for that to be coming from some kind of coherent, consistent worldview, then we ought to be taking care of the wider system that supports this system over which we have the most control or the most stewardship, right? So.
Yeah, and I mean, we're the dominant species on the planet. We have been that, and we've been extremely reckless with that power, so to speak. So with that kind of power to make decisions about what life survives, what life dies, it really demands a much higher level of responsibility. Self-responsibility, organizational responsibility, societal responsibility, and how people look after other people. It's so much higher level of responsibility and a real commitment to that, because there are going to be some very tough gaps to cross. There's going to be territory that's unfamiliar. It's uncertain. It's not going to be predictable. It's going to be just what it is. And sort of the opportunity then is to step into that, knowing personally and organizationally for that matter, that you have the trust on in yourself, you have got the trust in your capabilities, or you've got the trust in others if we extend it to company wide or family or team, but in other words, in a group of belonging, to take on whatever shows up and to really work with that to create something better. We always have control over how we respond. So
yeah, which again comes back to where we started this conversation, right? You talked about your OA experience, and taking control over how you responded to that set of circumstances. Now many of us are faced with the choice about how we respond to this new sets of circumstances. And I suppose you're placing that in a broader context of a more general sense of responsibility for us. How do we not only deal with this particular, what's the nature of the way in which or the nature of our actions in dealing with this particular crisis, but then more broadly, what's the nature of our behavior with respect to the broader ecosystem?
Exactly. And I mean, this is where the climate change issue, the real need to face climate change and to treat it as for the seriousness that it holds for all life on the planet. This is a place where instead of tinkering around with small tasks that a lot of companies would like to do, we've got bigger things that really engage much deeper levels of human ingenuity than we have thus far touched or tapped. We just haven't set the conditions for that. There are, of course, that's not a blanket statement. There's plenty of places, or there are places at least, where those responses like the X Prize work. But in terms of reconnecting to nature, it starts so simply, just going out, spending time. There's a group of mothers that I see that take their kids down to a creek, and it's small, but this is where you learn about systems thinking. This is where you see systems interaction, and this is where animals and birds show up, and all of a sudden, instead of everything being little lines connecting dots thing, you start seeing the whole flow of it. And I mean, that's beautiful and powerful. So yeah, it's definitely a time for bringing more of who we are out at a creative level.
Right. Well, you said a couple of things there. So are you linking bringing more of who we are out with connecting with nature?
Big part of it, because it is a whole system, and so are we. The body is a whole system of interactions. It's a 50 billion cells working together to keep you healthy. That's not insignificant. And as long as you treat, you feed it, you're in the right environment, you've got clean air, you've got quality food, it can actually do its job. The minute you start compromising on food and everything else, it can't do its job to the same degree. Or if emotionally you have an interruption that you don't actually deal with or address, then it gets stored, and the kinds of things you described in your own experience come sharply to the surface in one way or another. So it's exactly the same. It's like a metaphor, if you will. Nature's systems are healthy when there's respect given for these interactions, when there is an understanding. It doesn't even have to be an understanding. There just has to be enough respect. Understanding certainly helps, but having respect for it is really key to that. So yeah, simple place for everybody to start is to just spend some time.
Right. Connecting, and then that allows us to bring more of our to enhance our creative potential. In fact, we've had possibly two researchers now on the show who both have evidence, scientific evidence to suggest that our creativity is enhanced by time in nature. So that makes sense. What else do we need to focus on then? Because this time in particular, we're going to need to somehow. This is going to be a test for our creative capabilities for so many of us, right?
Yeah.
So spending time in nature, dealing on wherever we might be emotionally blocked. Where else should we be looking to maximize our creative potential?
I think the big shift at a leadership level is to recognize that every single person has the capacity to lead in their own way. So that's a redefinition of how we distribute power. It's a redefinition of how we even make decisions, because it now puts more control in in each person, and of course in the relationships that person, in the interactions that you're working with all the time. So I think it's a rethink then of how we run organizations, and this is you've had a couple of conversations with Tom Vanderloob on their self-managed work. You also talked to Pim and Demore with Corporate Rebels. I just did the same, an interview with Pim as well. So, I mean, great examples for organizations on where to go. You've got, this is not new territory. There's people that have forged the path, and what you're doing is learning from them. So I think that's the other part of it. So personally, there's some serious resilience skills that you can develop. Most of them, funnily enough, center around breathing. But just going into nature shifts your brainwave state. Your people, previous people, I'm sure, talked about that if they're, tipped into neuroscience at all. That's a really good self-care way. So, care for the self, and then building on that, rethinking systems and processes internally.
Yeah. Yeah. What you've just picked up on there, breathing, a previous guest on conversational intelligence spoke very eloquently on how much of our time we spend in fear, right? We're in this, the back of our brain, the fight flight mode. An extraordinary high proportion of our time we're in that state, and just simply by breathing and connecting to the breath and getting into the belly breathing, we can disengage from that state. And again, it's just so simple, but another way to enhance our potential for creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but you definitely cannot be creative from a depleted place. You have to look after yourself, shift your orientation so that you're in a place where you're being nourished for your creativity. You can't create from a state of exhaustion or depletion. That has to shift.
And then working on creating organization where the system itself allows for this expanded capability, as you say, allowing people to lead at all levels, distributing the leadership and because it's all very well people doing all this work on themselves, but then if they get into the office and they're boxed down in their cubicle, like you're not really maximizing the potential.
No, and I mean, I think the really tremendous thing that's happened with remote working, forcing a remote working, if you will, is that people get a taste of autonomy and what they can do with their time. Now, that means the people in the organizations that are saying, okay, I want you at your desk 9 to 5, have no idea how productivity works. It doesn't work 9 to 5. It works in 90-minute sprints. It works in the rhythm of the day, but it does not work 9 to 5. So some of these beliefs need to go. Some of those rigid ideas about how work gets done need to go, so that the autonomy that people are experiencing now can continue. Because can you imagine having a taste of autonomy, as you said, I've got time with my child, and does that mean at the end of this I go back to not having that time? Whoa, I mean, that's, and I mean, just even in education, now they're starting to put more courses online, and the kids are going, great, I don't have to spend this time commuting. I'm not contributing to the damaging of the environment, as one of my students said yesterday, because I do that just for fun. And so they're seeing the value of doing things differently, thinking differently, leading differently. And man, that's a massive opportunity in front of us. So once we've had that experience, I don't think there's any going back. I don't think you can go back without there being some suffering involved in the loss of freedom, in the loss of being able to have control over your life, more control over your life. And, it means that more people will need that to stay. We'll keep that. And that means organizations have to adapt.
Yeah. Well, and I think because this is such a pervasive pattern interruption, right? It's business, it's education, it's family, childcare, it's across the board. We absolutely are going to see. And it's interesting you put it in terms of autonomy. But yeah, of course, people are naturally, people literally physically cannot be monitored at the same level when they're working in their homes, or at least for the most part. Of course, we do have some stories of horrific home working conditions where almost every keystroke is monitored, right? But for many of us, this will represent being given a lot more autonomy. And in fact, a client of mine was just sharing yesterday how her boss, who had always been dead against home working, is now loving it, right? And it's now so this being forced to shift, may have people challenge their beliefs. And this is one of the things you talk about in your decision making for dummies, right? Is that this idea that we have to interrogate our beliefs in order to make good decisions. Well, this is perhaps forcing a lot of people to confront their beliefs.
Yeah, it's very confronting in that way. And I think that's incredibly valuable because it sort of blows away a lot of the more invisible assumptions that one makes, day to day, and brings them right to the surface and says, yeah, how do you feel about it now? Now that you don't have to quite live 9 to 5, or you can live it on your terms, you have control over how you live with it. Then how does that feel? I mean, I was a single mom, so I started my own business just because, as a single parent, I needed the freedom to be able, well, not because of that, but it was a factor. Let's just put it that way. I mean, I've got this high value for autonomy, so don't put me in a box. I'll just lose it. But I needed the freedom to be able to go and, take her to school, pick her up, go to her certain events. And I might work till midnight, but I had the freedom to be able to rearrange my day so that I could be, get those things done that were important to me. And that is what it, I think it's all about, is just having the freedom to do those things. And of course, what's interesting, going back to what you were saying, is that this whole business of 9 to 5, and trust, it requires trust. It requires not monitoring what people are doing at home, but saying, here's the goal. That's what we're working toward. Let's go for that. How you get there is up to you. Otherwise, you've got this patriarchal approach to management, which says, and it came up in a conversation, my people need to earn my trust. You're kind of going, well, thanks, Dad. If a CEO comes up with that, they're coming up with the idea that they're the dad and everybody else is the kids, and you guys just have to behave accordingly. Well, no, not that's so outdated at this point in time. It requires a serious update. So this is, again, as you say, because it's been forced, it's across the board. Those kinds of approaches need serious refreshing. It's an opportunity to kind of look at that and go, yeah, I don't think I'd suffocate under those conditions. So, yeah.
Yeah. Although I think what you brought in your personality there is a pertinent point, right? Your high need for autonomy. And something that Dr. Sarah Perry came on the show, she's an expert in remote working. She found that for in the main, productivity goes up when people are given the remote working option. But for certain personality types, it can actually go down. And it's for those personality types who have a need for a high level of direction and structure. So actually, the expression of trust and caring for somebody may be being more prescriptive, and it may look more patriarchal, let's say, but actually that may be something that somebody needs.
No, absolutely. And I mean, it's one of the reasons why people, when they leave, a corporate setting, or they've got life is, routine, it's regimented. There's a specific set of there's a lot of structure that goes with that. And then they try to become an entrepreneur, and it's hard because it's a different mindset altogether. So, I totally agree with you. I think that when you're shifting into a remote working, you've got to provide people with the support structure so they know how, because it's a completely different set of decisions. How do I focus myself so I can actually get done what I need to get done while I'm being a parent, while I'm, doing all these other things that all of a sudden are all mashed up into one big jumble of time. So, it is very much around what kind of support do you need? Not report in when you go to the bathroom, but what support do you need in order to get your work done out of home?
Yeah. Am I giving you, for certain people, it may be a question of, am I giving you enough direction? Am I giving you enough structure?
Yeah. What do you need? As opposed to tell us, when you're going to the bathroom, or, leaving your desk.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is just, ridiculous.
Yeah, no, indeed. Good. Well, it feels like we've had a really good look at what this interruption might mean for us. Is there anything you feel like we've sort of missed off in this discussion of where we're at?
I don't think so. We've covered quite a bit of territory. I think it's safe to say. So yeah, delightful and a lot of fun. Thank you, Richard.
Yeah, no, it's been great. I hope people find this valuable. So for people who want to learn more about what you've shared and what we've discussed, where's the best place for people to go and find you?
At the moment, Probably, oh gosh, it's hard to say, but LinkedIn, obviously, that's an easy place to go. I have a podcast, the Inspirational Insights podcast. We've talked about, you and I have talked about that. I also have From Insight to Action, which is my website. I'm rewriting it, but that's what I've got. So it's kind of what you see is what you get there. Yeah. And then, of course, there's the usual outlets like Twitter and so forth. But yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I do have a Patreon site.
Oh, Patreon. Okay. To support the podcast. Okay,
Yeah.
great. Yeah. And I can say from the Insight to Action website, and of course we'll post links to all of this beneath. There's a list of all of your blogs, and I found that I found your HuffPost blogs eminently readable, quite entertaining in the way you don't pull your punches, and in terms of how management looks today and how it could look differently. So
thank you.
Very
Well,
accessible.
Yeah, that platform closed down when they brought in a new editor, so we're not blogging on that anymore. But I'm glad the ones you have are value. So thank you. That's great.
Good. Okay. Well, thank you very much for your time. And I'm sure we'll speak again. Thank you.
We will. Thanks, Richard. Thanks to everyone.
Thanks.